And hello, again, this is Jim Dawkins, pastor and director of Living Sacrifice Ministries. This is our weekly study. It's Monday, and hope to get this posted soon. Again, I don't know if you're watching this on our Facebook page, if you're seeing it on our website or on YouTube. I'm glad to see some people have watched it, but I want to encourage people who do watch this to hit the like button or leave some comments, questions, things like that once in a while, just so we know people are out there and seeing it, so we get some kind of feedback to let them know what kind of things are happening, what kind of things you'd like to hear us do and see us do lessons and studies on in the future. I do have the lesson for today, and actually the next 9 weeks studies planned right now, but by all means the Lord does direct according to what His will is and what He wants, and sometimes that's going to be directed according to what the people listening are needing in their lives. We live in a time where I think some people feel we have more violence, more wars, more battles going on than ever before. And one thing that makes that perception at least so is the media makes it possible for us to know things in real time. I'm of the age that I remember the Vietnam War. I remember it was possible then to get footage from the ground, from the battles themselves, on the nightly news, based on what happened that day, or at least earlier, say the day before or earlier that week. And it was rather frightening. It was almost like you were living the war, particularly for those of us who had family who was there. Fast forwarding on to the Gulf War, the Persian Gulf, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, and when we had troops there, and we were actually watching war for the first time in real time as it happened. And this has been what's happened since. We've been able to see things not only unfold in minute-to-minute updates with things such as Facebook and Twitter and things like that, but again, in real time as it happens, and we can see it instantly. You know, I can videotape something with my cell phone, and boom, immediately have it shown all around the world. And I think this is another reason why people seem to think there's more war, because it's so instantly available. In reality, in the last several thousand years, and I used to have this figure, I don't really recall what it is right now. I should have had this available. It's like in the past recorded 7,000 years or something like that. There have been like 300 years where there have not been wars recorded. Now that's really, it says that we as a civilized people have had very few years where we have not been fighting one another. And that's just people fighting people. Now, these lessons are not going to be about physical warfare against other human beings, but it's about a spiritual warfare. Because as long as men have been fighting men, we've also been fighting a larger, grander warfare, and that is a spiritual battle. One that's been waged since the Garden of Eden. When God put the trees in the garden, the tree of knowledge and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, in the center of the garden, and gave instruction that the tree of life was good fruit, could be eaten. The tree of knowledge of good and evil was one to be left alone and not eaten. Immediately, Satan tempted Adam and Eve with this enticement to eat it and be made like gods, to be given powers that they did not have, so forth and so on. And this spiritual battle between good and evil ensued and has continued on ever since. So, in answer to this question, are we in fact in a spiritual battle? Yes, we are. We have been since the beginning of mankind. So the question would then be, are we armed? And if so, with what? If we were soldiers in a regular man's army, our commander would not be a good commander if he put us in battle and did not prepare us with the proper armaments, if he did not give us the correct weapons and tools and support system and the proper training to use it. Being soldiers of God, being part of his army, and with him being our commander, it's safe to say that we certainly have been armed properly. And shouldn't come as a shock to any of you that if we search the Bible, that we can find the answers to exactly what we're armed with and how to use these tools of battle. I mean, he had an actual physical army of men that he fit for battle in the Old Testament to gain entrance into the Promised Land. They actually did it physically. By his own design, they were often outnumbered, but when they followed him, they always came out victoriously. And while we're not likely to ever be called as Christians to battle a physical army, we will sometimes wage war when we are persecuted and need to stand up for ourselves, for our rights as Christians, particularly for those of you who may be watching this and live in Christian minority countries. I know a lot of our ministry partners, for example, are in places like India and Pakistan where they do face persecution at times. But what I'm talking about is having to actually rise up as an army, rise up as a people, and aggressively fight in a battle. We're not likely to find ourselves as Christians in that kind of situation, but what I'm talking about here is a spiritual battle where we will be called upon to fight spiritually against Satan and against the temptations that come against him and against all he stands for. So let's open our Bibles and see just what God says about arming ourselves and putting on the full armor of God. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever served in the military or know anybody who has served in the military, but any of you who have ever been soldiers in battle know that you were given a certain set of gear and trained in how to put it on, trained in how to wear it properly. If you didn't put it on properly, if you didn't put it all on, you were left vulnerable in certain areas. If you lost it, dropped it, didn't have it, forgot how to put it on and use it properly, you were made very vulnerable. And not only were you, but everyone else in your troop, everyone else in your army, all the other troops counted on you were. And this is why you need to remember, this is not only something that you must depend on, but you are counted on by the other Christians around you. They are all counting on you as well. So let's again go to our Bibles and Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 18 read like this. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God, that you may be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. Notice it says the full armor of God, not pick and choose what parts you want. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of the darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the full armor of God, that you may be able to resist in the evil day, and having done everything, to stand firm. It's interesting. I like what it says. By taking up this full armor of God, you can stand firm. It gives you a confidence. Stand firm, therefore, having girded your loins with truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. In addition to all, taking up the shield of faith, with which you will be able to extinguish the flaming missiles of the evil one, or the flaming darts, as it says in the King James, and take on the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. With all prayer and petition, pray at all times in the Spirit, and with this in view, be on the alert with all perseverance and petition for all the saints. Now, again, I asked if any of you have ever been in the military. Now, imagine going into battle without your weapon. Now, you wouldn't dare do that. Or without a helmet on your head. These days, with armor-piercing bullets and with shrapnel flying around, they even wear flak jackets and things like that, and special Kevlar vests. Imagine going in without something like that, or special footwear to keep your feet protected from sharp rocks and glass and broken things. Imagine doing something like that. Or if you've ever played a contact sport, here in the United States, football, American football, other countries where there are places, things like rugby and things like that, where there are special pads that are worn. Would you play these games without proper pads and equipment? The special kinds of shoes that are needed to grip the turf or the court or wherever you're playing properly? But you probably wouldn't, because it would not be safe, it would not be proper, it would be very ill-advised. So, since we know we wouldn't do these things, we wouldn't go into battle and fight an enemy without our gun. We know we wouldn't play football without a helmet. We wouldn't go and play rugby without the proper pads on. We wouldn't go play basketball without good shoes to keep from sliding on the court. Why is it that when God gives us very clear instructions to put a suit of armor on to wear every day, why do we neglect to put it on? Why is it that we decide, well, we're not going to wear it, or we're not going to put it all on, we're going to pick and choose which parts we're going to put on, or I'll put this part on today, but not all of it? Kind of interesting thinking, isn't it? Let's consider a few things. First, anyone who wears armor for anything only gets partial protection if they only put part of it on. If, for example, I play a sport where protection on my head is required, a helmet would be required. And so would protection on my knees, to keep from falling on my knees. Well, I decide today what I'm going to do. I'll wear my helmet, but I'm not going to wear my knee protection. Well, my head's not going to get hurt, but you know what? First time I fall on my knees, I'm probably going to hurt my knee. I'll probably at least skin my knee. I might even do worse than that. I'm really in trouble if I do it the other way around, then I skin my knee and break my head open. Here's another thing that could be even worse. What if I put that equipment on, but don't put it on correctly? Put on backwards. You're a soldier, you're in the army, and you put your helmet on backwards. Well, it doesn't fit right. You can't see through it, or you can't see properly. It doesn't stay in place. What if I say, well, yeah, I'll wear it some days, but not every day. I just don't like to wear it. And there are people like that. And we're going to get into how this applies to Christian armor as we get into this lesson. Like I say, we're going to be going on for 8 more weeks with this. You're going to see. See, the equipment manager in an athletic team, and I was the equipment manager for a football team, is responsible for issuing equipment and maintaining it if it breaks or needs repair, getting you a new piece, tuning it up if it needs adjusting. Now, what if he gets it to you and you don't wear it? Or if you get a piece and it's not working right and you don't report back to him? Or what if you get a piece that's new and you look at it and you say, you gave me this piece of equipment and I don't understand how to use it properly. You know, if you say, Pastor Jim, what does this have to do with me being a Christian? Well, let's look back at that text in Ephesians and find out. And then over the next few weeks, we're going to be examining each piece of this armor individually. Okay? Because each one of these pieces of armor has a very individual use. And we're going to be examining its use. The girdle of truth in verse 14. Now, we think of a girdle today as something that helps hold your stomach in to help look flat. The girdle here was more of a belt or a sash. The girdle was actually something that would go, if you'll see, around your waist here, more like a belt. And I would wear a tunic that went all the way down. But the problem with running in something like that is that I couldn't do that with all my weapons and things. So one thing I would do is if I would run, I would cinch it up, put it under my girdle, under my belt. Another thing it did is things like my sword and other things would hang from that girdle, hang from that belt. So, truthfully, this was a very key thing to me. It wasn't just to hold things in. It wasn't just to hold my clothes together. Okay, it was really a lot more than that. Without that on, everything else kind of fell apart. So we have here the girdle of truth. The breastplate of righteousness, again, was not just on my breast. It went through the breast and over my back as well. It was tightly woven, depending on the army I was fighting with. It could have been very tightly woven leather or even chain mesh. And the idea was to keep spears and arrows from piercing through it. Keep me very vulnerable. What it did was it narrowed down the area that made me vulnerable. Depending on my particular design, it might even come down my arms some, up to here some, meaning that my area that made me vulnerable was very small, right in here. And I better have that on, or all my vital organs in here were wide open to being shot, as well as in the back. The shoes of the gospel of peace. Now, the interesting thing about those shoes is not only do we all need to be wearing shoes, but the shoes of the Roman soldiers of the time also had a special stud on them, much like the spikes of a lot of our athletic shoes now for digging into the dirt, so that in close hand-to-hand combat or when digging in to keep from being pushed back, that's exactly what could happen. You could dig in and not be pushed backwards, or you could plow through and push your way through. Being made of metal, and the metal coming up over the top of over your sandal here, you also kept from being hurt here, and with the metal on the bottom, it kept you from being hurt underneath. The straps coming all the way up the back here of the foot made it a much more durable sandal than what was worn in every day. Shield of faith. The shield was a large rectangular shield, not like a round shield that you might see on someone on a horse. And even more importantly than that, but these shields were designed so that a whole row of soldiers could line up next to each other, lock the shields in together, and make a wall. And then the soldiers behind them could put their shields over top of them and make essentially a roof. So what happens? An army on the other side starts firing arrows, and they go thump, 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 thump on the front, or thump, thump, thump on the top, and your shield faithfully keep you protected inside them all. Your helmet, of course, was going to protect your entire head. Not only was it very metal and cover the top of your head, but it came down the sides here on your ears, sometimes over your eye and your nose, just little eyelets here, and some very ornate on the top, depending on the personal design. Extremely heavy. The sword being the sword of the Spirit, we see in verse 17, being the only offensive weapon, but it's also something that we are taking because we must also attack our enemy, the devil. We include in here another weapon. Our weapon, prayer, is not actually part of that body of armor, but it is something we're using when we go into battle, as we do when we go into everything else in our lives. So I've touched very briefly on each one of these. We're going to go into all of them in more detail in the coming weeks. It's a fascinating study that, like I said, can be, books can be written, actually have been written on. But just remember that any one of these things, if not used, if not worn, leaves us susceptible to Satan and to temptation, to sin, because he's going to be coming after us. He's going to be coming after us anyway. It is not a sin to be tempted. Temptation is there. It is a sin when you do give in to it. And I promise you that by putting on this armor, keeping it on, and being diligent and staying steadfast in your wearing of this armor, you will do much better in standing up to this temptation. I know every time I take it off, take a piece off, I find myself falling into the woes of that sin more often than when I keep myself girded completely in those that full armor. So let's prayerfully all look to keeping ourselves armed, or rather clothed in that full armor. And I will look forward to seeing everybody next week. And like I said, we'll be taking each piece of armor one at a time. Until then, thank you very much. God bless.